international people. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming back to the You and I talk show. This is your host, Louise Wachu, broadcasting from Vancouver. I'm so happy to be back. This is our fresh new season on the You and I talk show, and we are still talking about the interesting things that happen in our world and talking to the interesting people that know what they're talking about. So the summer and the break has been wonderful, beautiful. Vancouver, I traveled, I've been places. I will show you videos soon. I've been doing comedy. Life is funny. Life is so funny. You don't know how funny life is until you hang out with comedians. Oh my God, then it's tragic and funny. So, anyways, we'll see if there's anything to laugh about life today, because we're talking about the attacks on American embassies abroad, particularly in Africa. And we have an expert on the show. I'll bring him in the show right now to talk about his experience there and what exactly is going on. So let's bring our guest into the show right away. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Louise.
Thank you for being on the show with us.
It's an honor. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So let's tell people who you are, Mr. Robert O. Morris.
Well, I can tell you a few things. I am reputed to be the most handsome man on the face of the earth. You probably didn't know that.
Oh, we should not have been doing this on radio then.
Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. No, I've had a rather diverse experience in my 62 years, living in many places around the globe, doing rather unique experiences. I worked for 14 years for the Central Intelligence Agency, mostly overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I was in our Army Special Forces as a very, very young man. I got out of that 40 years ago after 3-4 years in service, and then spent the rest of my life doing entrepreneurial and corporate pursuits in international business, mostly in Eastern Europe, but also in parts of Africa and Western Europe as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long and diverse career, but the things I have truly achieved that are noteworthy is that I have the most wonderful wife in the world and 3 wonderful, healthy, intelligent, adventuresome children.
Great. Now, is your wife, was she CIA too? Do your kids, do your children dream of working for the CIA? How has that experience affected your life?
Other than the fact that 2 of my 3 children were born overseas while I was serving, not too much. I left the service when my 2 older children were still quite young. My current wife I met when I was working in the Republic of Georgia, long after I left the government service. My first wife, who was with me during my government service, well, she was a very good, let's say, partner in what we were doing, and performed in courageous and courageous ways that she probably hadn't planned for when we first got married.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, she performed wonderfully. It was a good experience overall for all of us. We got to live in wonderful places, and we met wonderful people along the way.
Mm-hmm. I see. So now, does anyone ever, this is a question that I ask and wonder, does anyone actually ever leave the CIA, or are you still working for them? How come you still connected and you still have information that most people don't, access to information that most people don't have? And what's the Spy Masters Guild?
Yes. So I don't. Did I say that I had access to information most people don't? I don't think so. I mean, I am, because of my background, I'm terribly interested and read quite a bit on what's going on now that I'm outside that circle of inside information. But I don't have direct access anymore. That's long passé. But the Spy Masters Guild happens to be a consortium of writers with whom I served in past years. One when I was working in the Soviet Union, one when I was working in Western Europe, who, after their retirement and or departure from the intelligence field, have become quite notable writers in their own right. And so that we've banded forces in this consortium, or guild as we've called it, just as a means to give ourselves a larger footprint and appeal to a larger audience. For example, my first work is nonfiction. It's autobiographical. Their initial works are pure fiction, but of the espionage genre. Mm-hmm. And we all are obviously, once, as you yourself probably can attest, once your mind expands in the international theater, and you become wary and knowledgeable and interested in what goes on outside the borders of one's own nation, you never lose that. So all of us maintain our intellectual curiosity and our research into what's going on around the world, and our experience in the intelligence field obviously plays a large role in that.
Yes. Once you go international, you can't be local anymore.
That's true. that's true.
So let's start by talking about your book, Fighting Windmills, A Quixotic Odyssey.
Yes, with great pleasure. The model for my autobiography obviously is Don Quixote. Mm-hmm. And the Fighting Windmills is from a scene in Cervantes' book where Don Quixote, in search of enemies and in his quest to be the noble knight, pictures or envisions the windmills on the Spanish plain to be dragons who are evil and whom he is bound and determined to fight and to defeat. So he jumped on his mule and he has his imaginary sword and charges the windmills, mm-hmm. which by definition is a double-edged sword. It's very noble in nature, mm-hmm. but on the other hand, quite foolhardy. And Don Quixote was the ultimate romantic idealist. Mm-hmm. And I fashion myself as a modern-day Don Quixote, somewhat noble in some pursuits, also somewhat foolhardy in others. But the motive for all these romantic idealist pursuits remains the same.
So you're saying that Don Quixote never actually had any enemies. He was fighting his own imagination.
Well, he created his own enemies in his own mind. Yeah, that's how I understand the book. Yes.
Now, speaking of people who create their own enemies,
okay.
The situation in Africa, in Libya, has America created its own enemies?
Well, that's a very good question. Has it created its own enemies? One could certainly argue the one side of the argument and say probably, or one could argue from the other side of the argumentative spectrum and just say that we find ourselves defending ourselves against enemies who have been created either intentionally or unintentionally. So I think that any intellectual pursuit of that very question might have good arguments on either side. Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, when we have an international presence, like all countries do, maybe not in as many nations where we have diplomatic relations. But when one has a large international presence, and obviously the United States has a large international presence, it also has the misfortune of sometimes carrying on its backside a large target. And there are those who have the penchant for targeting the United States, and it has certainly been the case recently in North Africa. Yeah.
So let's get to the North African situation. What do you think, or what do you know that's going on in Libya? What happened with the ambassador and the CIA? The CIA has depleted sources, which means that pretty much CIA is broke, and they're still going to increase their presence in North Africa. So what's really going on?
Well, it's interesting, and we, not being inside the guarded walls anymore, I depend on the news sources, and from the news sources we were getting in various reports, there were somewhat conflicting reports of what actually happened. I think the administration in the United States reported at first glance, anyway, that this was all in reaction to this anti-Muslim or satiric film that was created inside the United States, and that it was just pure religious protest against the publication of that film. I think that's perhaps partially true. The film, as far as I understand, came out about 6 months ago, and so it's been around for some time. I think, and I was so curious about it that I actually watched the film, at least portions of it on YouTube, and it was so absurd and obviously satirical, but done in very poor and qualitatively poor taste, that I turned it off. Now, I think that might have been used by those who had more malicious intent to stir up emotion, as that film would, because it was done in very poor taste, to just as a smokescreen for the more violent attacks which took place. In fact, the Libyan president and reports which have since come out from alleged intelligence sources say that the attack on the consulate in Benghazi was premeditated, had been in the planning stages for some time, and that, in fact, certain parts of the Libyan government had received intelligence that it was about to happen, reported that to their American colleagues, and apparently either it was misreported or disregarded or whatever the case may be. Be that as it may, 4 servants of our diplomatic service lost their lives because they weren't prepared, or the information wasn't properly reported to them. And that's a shame, because I think Ambassador Stevens, from I don't know him personally, didn't know him personally, but from what I've read, he was a real proponent for democratic development and freedoms for the Libyan people. Put a great deal of passion and effort into really building strong relations with the Libyan government, and was very dedicated towards the democratization of Libya, as opposed to the regime of Mr. Gaddafi. So it's a shame that someone who is, I can't say how effective he was, but certainly his heart was in the right place, and his energy and passion was directed in what would seem to be a very positive direction. And it's certainly a shame that someone like that, who was obviously a good civil servant on behalf of his nation, would lose his life.
Now, there's an article in the Global Research Canadian newsletter which says that these are U.S.-backed terrorists that have murdered the U.S. ambassador in Libya, that the United States knowingly handed Libya to Al-Qaeda. What can you say about that? And now, if you collaborate with terrorist groups or minor groups to help you overtake a country, and afterwards, how can you be surprised by their ways?
Well, I wouldn't give much credence to that report. It doesn't seem logical or rational to me in any sense. I mean, it seems to make as much sense as the rumors or conspiracy theories which were prevalent after September 11th, 2001, that this was actually a U.S. government-sponsored attempt to plot, which there are conspiracy theories everywhere. I will say that within the opposition movement against Gaddafi, I would imagine, and again, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that within the move to remove Mr. Gaddafi from power, not only were there forward-thinking Democrats who passionately and diligently wanted to gain their freedom, were probably within those groups as well, small segments of less freedom-loving folks, but ones who were taking advantage of an opportunity, perhaps more radical elements, to find a niche where they might come into a position of more power within the country. So in the sense where you cite that, well, perhaps in our efforts to support the movement against Gaddafi, we also unwittingly lent support to those who bore us ill will. There may be some truth to that. And I think that a number of people in our Senate and Congress, some well-informed members of our Senate, were fearful of that very circumstance, and perhaps it did come to pass.
I see. So the situation in Libya as it happened, it's NATO, the NATO nations, America, France, and the UK mainly,
Right.
who decided to bomb Libya. They said it was it was supposed to be a humanitarian nation. And so they killed the president. Well, he didn't call himself the president. Gaddafi didn't call himself the president. And so now the country is in chaos. And some people have said that Libya will become like Somalia, and that amidst, this chaos is precisely what America needs in order to exploit the natural resources from Libya and from those North African countries and anyone else that's connected, because the situation in Libya has spilled over to Mali. So people are saying that the chaos is precisely, no one is fighting actually against chaos. Chaos is actually what they need in order to exploit the resources of those nations.
Do you believe that, Louise?
Well, I personally don't believe in anything. I learn. I inform and educate myself. Well,
I would find that whole theory to be completely against my belief system and our national belief system. I think there are people outside of our environment who probably seriously believe theories such as those. I don't happen to be one of them. The United States has a history of humanitarian aid which exceeds any other nation on the face of the earth. And the nation that I have grown up in, now 60 some years, and the nation that I was proud to serve, and the nation that I love, despite all of its warts, of which we certainly have them, like every other nation on the globe, is not one that creates chaos to exploit natural resources. It's not in our DNA. I understand how many people who think negatively of the United States and maybe think we're completely dominated and ruled by the corporate world might come to theories like that. But that's not the way I see the world, and that's not the nation that I served with some passion for so many years.
Very interesting. Now, when we speak about nations, and then let's say we want to bring what we have, the good things about America, we want to export those things abroad, and that's why you go to war to, quote, liberate a country. But in the case of Libya, for example, they say that the Libyan system had access to free education, free housing, free health care, and the country was debt-free. So to such a country, what is democracy going to bring that's more than free education, free housing, free health care, debt-free? And do you think that the way to bring that democracy that you say you're going to bring to that nation is to bomb them?
Well, it sounds like a utopia, doesn't it, Louise? So if it was such a utopia, then why were there so many hundreds of thousands of people in Libya who wanted to depose the kindly gentleman who so benevolently brought them all of these wonderful assets like free education and freedom from debt, etc.? I think it might not have been as utopian as you've described, or else the people may not have been so discontent. So there seems to be somewhat of a dichotomy in the way that you've described it and in the way that history played itself out. No?
Yes, but the people were assisted by NATO. Without NATO bombing and going to war to liberate the country, there would be no revolution. So if it's an outside revolution, when America had its revolution, no one came to assist you in your revolution, to help you start a revolution. A revolution seems to be like an inside thing. There's something, the initiative has to come from the inside, from the people themselves. So when the people are aided by international forces, how does that become a legitimate revolution?
Well, actually, just to maybe advise you a bit on American history, without the assistance paid by France towards the end of our revolution, we would not have been victorious. So, is
that why the Americans don't like the French? They help them achieve their freedom.
Well, actually, we sent our soldiers to help liberate France on more than one occasion, as you might recall. But anyway, I think I lived in France. My daughter was born in France. I have a very healthy respect and admiration for the French, as I think most Americans do. Anyway, but that's another topic altogether. But no, I don't think that we would have that we would find common ground on our interpretation of helping liberation movements. For example, I might ask you, what should the world do, if anything, in Syria when the Syrian regime seems to be slaughtering tens of thousands of their own countrymen in order to maintain power? And should we all stand on the sidelines and just do nothing? Or should we introduce project ourselves in one way, preferably diplomatically, but diplomatic efforts don't seem to be working very well. And we're just let the chaos go on and the people die, and we all sit back and wring our hands and shake our heads and say, gee, how unfortunate that all those people are dying. I don't know. I mean, it's...
Well, some experts are saying that the war on Syria will happen, and it's not just a war on Syria, it's a war that will lead to war with Iran. So it's not necessarily, some experts are saying it's not necessarily has to do with Syria, it's towards Iran.
Yeah, well, and that's obviously a very serious topic. I mean, what the question about Iran is obviously a very serious one. The Iranians have been supporting the Syrians, of course, almost exclusively for the past decade. The Russians have been supporting the Syrians, and the Russians have been supporting the Iranians. I mean, there are some questions about what are the goals of that exercise. Are the goals of that exercise for Iran to actually get the nuclear capabilities that they allegedly seek? And if so, what do they do with them? Do they make good on their threat, like President Ahmadinejad, to eradicate the state of Israel from the map, or is it strictly all for peaceful purposes? And if it turns out that their atomic development is not for peaceful purposes, like most people tend to believe, then what becomes of the status of peace versus war in the Middle East? It's a very dangerous time, I think, in or period of our history.
Yes,
in which there's so many flashpoints.
We need very wise people to be in charge of those decisions.
Yeah, maybe you and me should do that, Louise. What do you think?
I think I would start off by asking you how come the CIA is broke. I don't want to work with broke organizations.
Did I say they were broke? I don't think so.
Well, this depleted resources, what does it mean?
I see. You know, my publicist sometimes uses phrases that are meant to pique interest more than reflect accuracy. But, I mean, it's obviously the resources of the Central Intelligence Agency are limited. They're limited in scope of budget, of course, but they're also limited in terms of personnel. It's not a huge organization. It's an organization which, by nature, has very few assets in any country at any given point in time. And so if there are so many flashpoints around the world, which obviously there are, if you look at the number of countries around the globe, not only in North Africa, but in Central Africa and Southeast Asia and also in Western Europe, where there were protests in the past week to 10 days against this film or whatever motivated the protest. I think it numbered 25, 30 countries. So it was a rather major reaction, for whatever the cause, against this film or against U.S. interests or what have you. Mm-hmm. So it's like the same problem that, and hopefully you haven't had this in Canada, but here in the United States we've had a number of wildfires throughout our western states. Mm-hmm. And the more wildfires you have, the more difficult it is to fight against them, because obviously there are limited numbers of firefighters and limited numbers of necessary equipment. So therefore they spread themselves thin. And the same formula would seem to work in trying to get to the bottom and gather intelligence on what are the causes and who are the perpetrators of the more serious events which took place, and so that we can determine what is the next step.
So people are reacting badly against America, and it gets worse. It seems to get worse. what do you think? What do you think is going on? Are people around the world becoming all anti-American, or has America become anti-people of the world, and now they are rejecting it? I don't know.
I'm not sure either interpretation would fit with my ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Let me talk a little bit about what motivated me to do what I did, and I think that will lead us back to answer your question.
Yes.
When I joined the Central Intelligence Agency, I was already 30 years old, and I'd served in the Army and in the Special Forces, and I'd gone to a major university and studied Russian and international affairs here in the United States, and then I'd worked for 5 years. But when I was recruited to join the organization, what appealed to me, and I think is a statement that one could make for at least 95%, if not more, of the people who joined that organization. What motivated me to do it was, first of all, it was the height of the Cold War. My academic intellectual interests, and also when I was in the military, were all geared towards the Soviet Union, which is why I studied Russian at Georgetown and why I studied Russian area studies and foreign policy. And what motivated me to do that was my absolute lack of respect for the oppressive means in which the Soviet Union dominated its people. I can say that yes, they had housing, yes, they had education, yes, they had the basics that one needs to survive, but they didn't have things which I held dear, and which I think most people of my persuasion hold dear, and that's freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to pursue a course that one wanted in life, that one wanted to pursue. And to me, and to others who think like me, freedom is everything.
Yes, I agree with you. That's why that's why I live in Vancouver. Yeah,
and I think you made a good choice. But I think you'll agree too. I mean, I've had the honor to read about your background on your website, and I think of all people who inhabit this earth, you might have one of the most distinct and poignant appreciations for the importance of freedom. And that is, I think, a goal that is worth pursuing, not only on an individual path, but on a global path. And so there are various ways of approaching freedom, and of course it depends on the interpretation of the proponent who's trying to assist someone else to attain their freedom.
Mm-hmm. So does it look like America is still working for freedom, though? Because it seems to be, this is what people have complained about, that these countries that they say they're going to liberate, they pretty much just liberate them for American companies to come and take over this. So the freedom of the people that you're talking about seems more like the freedom of international corporations to take over when America supposedly delivers freedom, you know.
Yeah, but I don't see it that way, Louise. I really don't. I think the anti-American elements in the global community like to portray it as that way, but that's not the way I see it. And I've spent a good number of years living and serving and knowing what are the values of this nation, and that interpretation is contrary to everything I know and everything I believe. It could be, however, that I'm absolutely wrong, but I don't think so.
Mhm.
I mean,
Now.
there are people who will always. I mean, it takes me back to the days of the Soviet Union. Every morning when I was working in Moscow, every morning I woke up when I turned on the television and I watched Pravda or I watched Izvestia or any of the other shows there. There was this constant barrage that I was listening to. Of course, I needed to know what they were thinking and what they were saying and so forth. But this constant barrage of propaganda, anti-American propaganda, anti-Western also. They didn't reserve it just for the Americans. They reserved it for anyone who was outside of their sphere of influence. But that same sort of Soviet style of propaganda is prevalent throughout the world, and there are those who have diversely different views of the world than we do here in the United States, and they, like anyone who is trying to make a point of view and make other people believe their point of view, they propagandize in very negative fashion.
Mhm.
Kind of like if you watch our presidential election, one party propagandizes against the other, and the other reciprocates, and somewhere in there may be a grain of truth, but it seldom happens.
Yeah. And speaking of politicians and elections, there's an interesting question that I have here. Does the intelligence community support the policies of the Obama administration? It's one of the questions that you can answer.
Sure. Well, the intelligence community serves the President of the United States. President Obama is the commander-in-chief. So, yes, by definition, the intelligence community supports the Obama administration. It can't be otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say, however, that the intelligence community is 100% in favor of certain policies propagated by one administration or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's safe to say that the intelligence community is being probably more on the conservative side of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
They probably tend to be more comfortable with administrations which see the world from a more conservative vantage point.
So the CIA people can't wait for Romney to be president?
I can't say that with any sense of accuracy. I think that I can tell you this, because I served right after the administration of President Carter, and I left the service of the agency just in the beginning years of the administration of President Clinton. And I can say this, that it comes down to guns and butter, and the Democratic administrations, it's their political vision. It's a vision. It's not more right or less right than any other one, but it's their political vision. Tends to feel that the military and the intelligence community are, by definition, somewhat less important than other requirements. But
Mm-hmm.
what you see, the tendency when there is a Democratic administration, especially when not only the executive branch but the legislative branches are dominated by the Democratic Party,
mm-hmm.
that you see a diminution of not only numbers but budget and other items that support basic intelligence gathering.
Mm-hmm.
So does the intelligence community support the commander-in-chief? Of course they do.
Mm-hmm.
Would they rather have someone else in there? I don't know. Maybe it's certainly a reasonable supposition, but I can't tell you with any certainty.
I see. Now, what about this idea out there that Obama has worked for the CIA, is a CIA asset? Is that any truth to that, or is that the more crazy people talking?
That's the first time I've heard that one.
I'm the
Seriously,
first crazy person to tell you that Obama...
I've never heard that before. Where did you hear that? I've never read anything about it. Never heard anything. I find it, frankly, please forgive me. I find it kind of preposterous. But anyway, it's interesting.
It would be unfathomable that he would be a CIA asset. He would be working for the CIA.
Unfathomable, yeah. I think so. I think so. You think it's possible? That'd be a very interesting topic for your next book.
Well, people have already written about it, and
really?
Yes. And I guess I wouldn't really be outing him at all.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I haven't seen that, honestly. Maybe I'm living a sheltered life. I don't know, but I haven't seen or read anything like that. But I would. We had when I was in the military, of course, we had a scale of attributing a level of believability to a certain piece of intelligence, and it went alphabetically from A to F and numerically from 1 to 6. And if something was given an A1 rating, then it meant that was surefire, 100% accurate intelligence. And if something was very far-fetched and unlikely at best, it was given an F6. Mm-hmm. So I would give the possibility that our commander-in-chief somehow a CIA agent, I'd give that an F6. Not possible.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. We'll stop it at F6. Now, this book is about you. The Don Quixote is about you. It's about your real life experience. Are you allowed to talk about your real life experience? Isn't it sensitive material, classified information? How can you be allowed to talk about your experience with the CIA?
Well, when every person who joins the CIA, as he's going through his in-processing, one of the things that each of us sign is a mandatory requirement, a contract, a pledge, that should we ever write anything, be it fiction or nonfiction or poetry or music or whatever the case may be, that before publication we have to submit it to the CIA Publications Review Board. And they go through every word, every I, every dotted I, every period, just to make sure that what is written there is acceptable from a classification standpoint for the public to read. Mm-hmm. Now, my book, you'll find, when I submitted it, there are many parts which are blacked out. Just big black lines, sometimes paragraphs in duration, of covering up what I had written in the book, so that it couldn't be read. So it's a form of censorship, but it's part of the process. Mm-hmm. The interesting part is that the more intriguing things that I was able to write about in the book, because other people have also written about one part or another of those same experiences, I was able to keep them in the book. So I'm not dissatisfied with the censorship part. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, some of the paragraphs and sentences, and sometimes even words, which were censored, were in fact not as interesting or intriguing as that which the reader thinks was there, which was blacked out. So it makes the book much more intriguing with the black lines, because otherwise they'd really read what I had to say and find, well, maybe that wasn't that interesting. So it worked to my advantage.
Wow, very, very nice. So, to a person who loves freedom, we were just speaking of freedom of speech and movement.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel like your freedom has been restricted by such moves?
No, because I was given the choice to do it, and I chose to. So I exercised my freedom of choice. And I chose to live by that prohibition. And not knowing when I was a young man of 30 whether I would ever really write anything, even though it was in the back of my mind for years.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, if one chooses a certain path, then one can't second guess the path that one has chosen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I have no problem with it. I mean, they did it quickly, they did it thoroughly, and in fact, there were a couple things that I questioned when I'd gotten back my manuscript, and I pointed it out to the Publications Review Board, and they acquiesced that yes, Robert, you have a good point. You're correct, and we can eliminate that particular piece of censorship. So they're quick and they're diligent and they're open-minded about what is and what isn't releasable to the general public.
Mm-hmm. Wow, now I'm curious about the things that they blocked out, like you say.
Well, you'll have to read the book. What I'm going to suggest, Louise,
yes,
is that I send you a signed copy and you send me a signed copy of Positivision. Is that a deal?
Absolutely, and mine is not censored because I've self-published and never worked for anyone that could possibly censor me.
Oh, that's good. Well, that means I get to read all the secrets of your life, and that will be very interesting.
Yes, the ones that I chose to reveal.
Yeah. Well.
So, speaking of your journey, you said something interesting earlier. You have lived in Africa for many years. What was your experience in Ivory Coast? When did you live in Ivory Coast?
I lived in Ivory Coast during the presidency of Houphouët-Boigny.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the middle 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And Ivory Coast was I think quite a paradise, actually. It was quite well governed, and people had a very good lifestyle. It was still very much influenced by the French, although obviously the country was ruled independently, but there was still a very strong French influence in the country and influencing, helping to assist or support or influence the government.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed Ivory Coast quite a bit. It was my base of operations at the time. I was pretty much working across much of the African continent. We were selling farm equipment and timber equipment.
Now, when you say you were selling farm equipment, do you mean like guns and more guns, or
no?
Is that the cover for selling arms to
Come on,
fighting groups in Africa, or is that like really, really selling?
No, that's. I think you're letting your creativity and imagination carry you away. But no, we were really selling farming implements and timber equipment. For example, I used to in Ivory Coast we had a very big, of course, the timber industry in West Africa. Mm-hmm. Beautiful African timber was very strong in those years, and we were selling logging tractors in Ivory Coast and Nigeria and Ghana and Gabon and Cameroon and Zaire, and had a rather large market for the timber side of what we were doing, as well as selling farming implements and farming tractors and that sort of thing. Most of what we were doing. I'm sorry?
Yes. Was this your way of collecting intelligence from the local people? Yes, we're selling you logging timber. Yes. Now tell us about your natural resources. Where are they? No?
Well, I will grant you this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my friends thought I was doing. But to be perfectly honest, swear on the grave of my parents that no, I was only selling equipment, and I was learning about the beauty of the continent of Africa.
Uh-huh.
That's where I first started to learn French,
mm-hmm.
and except I was studying with the Peace Corps contingent
mm-hmm.
there, and so when I later lived in Paris, I sort of adopted the rhythmic intonation of African French. And so when I went to Paris,
Ivorian people,
like Ivoirien, yeah, and people in the Parisians would look at me like I was something alien because I was speaking like an Ivoirian, very bad French to begin with, but with an Ivoirian intonation. So it was very interesting.
Wow.
But I loved Ivory Coast. My wife, first wife, was there, and she was teaching English to future tourist guides, Ivoirian tourist guides, and we enjoyed our time there very much.
So that means she was training future CIA operatives.
Yes,
local. She was training local assets. Yeah, okay, I understand. So that was her cover, and this was your cover.
Yeah, okay. There's no winning with you, is there, Louise?
Well, you must agree.
But later,
when you
let me tell you this.
This is the thing. If you say you work for the CIA, we expect you to be doing some James Bond stuff underground, and of course on the surface, we expect you to be pretending to party.
Yeah, that's true. Well, what the saddest day of my life was when I retired from the CIA, and I had to give up my Maserati automobile, the one with the machine guns under the headlights, like James Bond had.
Wow.
I missed that car terribly. Now that's the biggest injustice that we people who actually did this work have to bear. That everyone thinks we had such an extraordinarily interesting life with fast cars and beautiful, scantily clad women chasing after us everywhere we went. Louise, I can't tell you, nothing could be further from the truth.
You wish it had been like that. Then maybe
I
you
used to have wonderful,
CIA.
very colorful dreams about that. But as hard as I dreamed and as much as I prayed to the Great Spirit, none of that ever transpired in my life.
So the CIA killed you pretty much. I guess that did you think when you went into the CIA that would be the life, and then that's why you quit the CIA, or?
And it took me 13 years to figure it out. Yeah, that was it. No, I mean there were no misconceptions. I mean the work of an intelligence officer has its fleeting moments of thrill and fleeting moments of some danger. I mean, there is in every man's career in that field. But most of it is not too dissimilar from what your international CNN reporters do. They're out there trying to gather information. In their case, in the CNN case, it's overt information so that they can report back home. In 99% of our cases, this is information which is not overt. It is covert, and therefore not readily available to the public. So actually, you have to implement means to get it.
Have you heard about talks that some of these journalists, CNN and others, they pose as journalists, but really they are CIA? So it's funny when you say the CNN reporters.
Well, that's been a claim for decades. The Soviets even arrested a Newsweek reporter back in the late 70s claiming he was CIA. Of course he wasn't. But the poor man was, he was out there doing his job, gathering overt information about life in the Soviet Union. Except, I guess the Soviet regime did not particularly appreciate what he was reporting, and therefore they arrested him, sort of as a deterrence for people to dig too deeply into their society and to report it to the West, because it was a closed society. They didn't want that information out in the Western eyes, because they wanted the world to think that they were indeed a superpower on the highest level, which they really weren't. But no, that there is a distinct difference. There's overt information, there's covert information. The means to get overt information is one modus operandi, and the means to get covert information, harder to get, has another modus operandi, and that's what we were busy with.
Nice, very, very nice. So we have just a few minutes left. We're coming to the end of the show, and do you have any questions that you want to ask me? I mean, I have interrogated you on the show.
Unmercifully, I might add, Louise. No, I have a great deal of empathy with people who have walked a path similar to yours, and I know that there must have been a great deal of pain and suffering in the path that you have walked, and to arrive towards the end of the road, being strong and being concerned and supportive of the human quest, I think is a trait of which you should be extremely proud. And I know that I cannot wait for you to send me a signed copy of your book so that I can read it. And I know that I will be enthralled by what I read and what you've been able to do after such a challenging beginning.
I have been able now. Now I'm just laughing. It's my solution to life is just laugh about it and it will disappear. Because as big as problems may appear to be, when you start laughing about them, they all of a sudden seem smaller than they are. So I don't know if we can use the same method to bring peace. Just laugh at the people who love war or something.
Well, I would like to interject something. I mean, a lot of people purchase my book because I write about my CIA experiences, my Special Forces experiences, and so forth. But that's the real motive for writing my book, was really to reflect upon the spiritual journey that I've enjoyed and that I've been fortunate enough to enjoy. And I think that's perhaps the part that I would commend most strongly to you and to your friends and listeners. I write about certain things which didn't always come easy to me, but which I think are universally positive traits. One is the ability of forgiving one's trespasser, forgiveness of those who have bore malevolence against you. And I think the power to forgive is one of those very difficult to attain attributes which, if the human race were successful in adopting the ability to forgive, that the world would have a whole lot less violence and hatred and some of the hot spots that we're seeing in the world today. And going back, I don't know your particular background in Rwanda, but in Rwanda, they're obviously better than I. Had there been the ability for certain groups to be more forgiving of the other, would it have made a difference in some of the atrocities that took place there? The same thing in former Yugoslavia. Had certain ethnic groups been able to forgive the other for whatever sins may have happened centuries before, which have been propagated through generations, if they had been able to forgive, would all of that violence been avoided?
It's a very interesting concept because, let's say, for example, the way that America was attacked on September 11th, how come it doesn't come in the mind of America when it's attacked or menaced that it could forgive? But instead of forgiving, they go to war for many, many years and bomb even countries that had nothing to do with the attack. So this concept of forgiveness it's very touchy because it always seems to be like Western nations are free not to forgive each other. They're free to go to war whenever they attacked or whenever they're menaced. But other nations out there, if they go to war, if they have a beef between themselves, why don't they make nice? Why don't they forgive each other and be at peace? You see what I mean?
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. I guess we all on the planet, and I don't think you can put a national stamp on one part of the globe's inability to forgive as opposed to another one. I think it's an attribute which only a very small, tiny portion of the human race has been able to do, and I think it's certainly against the nature of most humans. I think it's probably becoming more of a prominent attribute as people evolve, but unfortunately, I know lots of people who maintain just interfamily squabbles throughout their lifetime, and then they're on their deathbed, and either they get this moment of enlightenment and finally forgive somehow, or they die holding all of these resentments inside. And were it that everyone could learn the power of forgiveness, I think we probably would see a benefit in less violence and less resentments around the globe.
Yes,
but it
totally.
may not be in my lifetime. Maybe in your lifetime, but probably not in mine.
Let's hope I'm 1 year old.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert. The book is called Fighting Windmills, A Quixotic Odyssey, and your website is robertomorris.com. People, it's robertomorris.com, because I actually typed in Robert Morris earlier, and it's a completely different person.
Indeed it is. There are many impersonators who forget to put the O there.
Yeah.
Do you know what the O stands for, Louise?
What does it stand for?
Oglethorpe.
What?
Oglethorpe.
Oglethorpe. Is that a real name?
Yeah, it is. That's why I just put O.
Wow. Where is that from?
It's an old English name. It's an old English name. Actually, I'm joking. My middle name is Owen, but
oh, okay.
But it's just as oppressive as Oglethorpe. But anyway.
Isn't Owen Irish?
Owen is yes, partially Irish. Could be Norman as well. It has several sources. But anyway, but it was my grandfather's name, and it's the one that has been bestowed upon me, and I wear it as a badge of honor. A badge of honor.
Yes.
My grandfather's name.
That's what's up. Well, thank you so much for being with us. It has been a very interesting interview, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to love this listening. You have shared so much interesting things.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor speaking with you, and hopefully we'll have the chance to meet someday.
Yes.
I would enjoy that.
We are keeping in touch. We're exchanging books for sure.
Yes, please. I don't know how we'll do that, but my email address is on my website. Yours is probably theirs too, and we can arrange it that way.
Yes.
Yes?
No need to go through the publicist and the agents anymore. Now
No. Now we deal direct.
Yes.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Robert. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Louise. You too. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you, my international people, for following us. Wow, we're back, and we're not holding anything back. We're asking all the questions that you ask. Some of the questions, most of the questions are not my questions. Actually, I'm not that interesting. I get questions from a lot of people. Hey, Louise, ask this. So I ask your questions plus my questions plus imaginary questions, and then they answer or they don't, and then we have a fun conversation because that's what's happening. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for being back. We're back. Yes, we love it. We love you back. Thank you. Have a great week. We'll be sending you more interesting content and information for all the intelligent, the silent thinkers. Yes, beautiful. Muramuche, Imana.